One thing that has been near and dear to my heart for a number of years has been landscaping with native plants, and the way that has evolved it's been real interesting. Now we're at a phase in the landscaping with native plants where the emphasis is on creating pollinator-friendly landscapes. At least that's an emphasis a lot of people have. In recent years, we've seen a lot of attention given to the rapid decline of insect populations around the world, globally, from the tundras to the temperate forests to our deserts to the virgin rainforests. The insect populations have just really crashed dramatically, and the result of that has been very dramatic on the ecosystems. Approximately 85% of the flowering plants are insect pollinated, so they suffer. Plants are suffering from the loss of insects. Insects are the basic food chain that support birds and small mammals and reptiles. So those populations have crashed also in a lot of areas, sometimes up to 50% less or fewer birds have been recorded. So creating and preserving pollinator habitats has become a national initiative, not just because the economy involved with food production, but also because of all the other ramifications. Federal and state governments, conservation groups declared pollinator days and pollinator festivals. Albuquerque's a member of Bee City, USA, with an annual festival. Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge now has a backyard certification program for creating habitat. National Wildlife has had it for decades. A lot of the state agencies around the country have programs for certification. Cherries Society and some other groups have programs. So it's a real initiative now to create pollinator-friendly landscapes in our yard. Let me see what I need to do here to get to, there we go. So creating and preserving urban habitats for birds, bees, and butterflies is more than just turning off the sprinkler, planting a few native plants, having a few accent plants, a shrub in the front yard and a tree in the backyard. What we're talking about is a totally different paradigm from what traditionally has been the home developers' concept of what a yard should be. And many landscape architects have not really understood the importance of creating a habitat, not just a pretty yard that's comfortable and satisfying and pleasing to live in for ourselves, but that also accommodates the pollinators. So unfortunately, if we walk around our neighborhoods, well, first of all, if we want to create a pollinator habitat, we need native plants, because at some point in the life cycle of most butterflies and moths and bees, they depend on native plants, whether it's for a host for the caterpillars or for nectar and food throughout the year to provide for their nesting needs for bees. So we have to have, at some point in the life cycle, native plants. Now, every plant in the yard doesn't have to be a native plant to be certified, but at least 50% of the plants is what several of the organizations require, and no pesticides or herbicides. So when we walk through our neighborhoods and look and see what has been planted there over the years or recently, typically it's 80% of the urban landscaping, particularly yard landscaping, uses trees and shrubs that are exotic. They're not from here. So if you look at this picture from Corrales. It's a beautiful garden, but really there's most of those plants wouldn't be here without intense human care. So and they don't really supply the year-round needs of pollinators. The plants that have been displaced do that. They provide food, sustenance, nesting areas. But when we displace those with a lot, in this case, densely packed exotic plants, we're replacing communities that have really evolved in this area on the land we're standing on and living on, that evolved since the last ice age. And plants have evolved, for hundreds of millions of years. And when you think about what a plant is, it's the cumulative influence of hundreds of millions of years of wind and rain, of climate change through the decades and through the thousands of years, the blazing sun, the freezing temperatures, the soil organisms. And the plant is actually the manifestation, the physical manifestation of all these things, influences that abiotic influences that come together and manifest themselves as living organisms, as plants. And, over the billion years of continents shifting around on the tectonic plates, of volcanoes and ice ages coming and going, meteors hitting, the plants have developed some very complex relationships with themselves and with the soil biota. And then about 150 million years ago, you didn't know I was going to cover this much time in my talk, did you? But 150 million years ago, another player came on the stage, and that was beetles. And beetles, according to the fossil records of the first pollinators, they weren't very sophisticated. They just crawled around on the plants, eating the pollen and eating the plants. And gradually the plants worked out that they could target beetles and other, 50 million years, 150 million years later, as bees entered the scene, they could use them to target the reproduction of exchange of pollen. So for 150 million years now, pollinators and plants have been working together and developing incredible relationships that we can't even imagine. Some of them are so mysterious that it really scratches your head on how this works. And then, within the last 100 years, there's been another actor, a major player on the stage, and that's humans. And humans have modified landscapes around the world. And I think I just recently read that all the human construction and the human building around the world now creates more mass than all the animals and plants and natural or organic things put together. So humans are the dominant force on the planet. So let's go to the next slide. So I feel a real imperative that we need to repair the environment. And seems like each year there's more and more evidence that humans are doing really drastic things to the environment, ultimately to our own, not just only discredit, but to our own, we suffer from it also. So if we can create just a habitat in our backyard that will support a few pollinators, then I think we've made a step in the right direction. This is just a block from where I live. I live just beyond this red roof house here. When I moved here, this was all pristine desert adjacent to Petroglyph National Monument, probably 2,000 acres or so at least. And I would very frequently, take a stroll out my back door and in 5 minutes be out in the desert looking at the plants and what animals I could see also. Now, this has all been replaced. The bulldozers came in, and now there's, I think, 2,000 houses been built and a large multi-purpose school and a sports complex for the school system. And it's going on and on and on. It's not slowing down. So this is what I discovered when I first moved to Albuquerque and walked out my back door. This doesn't look like a real scenic wonderland. It's certainly not a mountain meadow with rippling flowers in the breeze, but it has its own magic. The soil here, which is all windblown sand, had a tremendous seed bank. And every year after when the spring rains came and the monsoon rains came, there would be a whole new group of wildflowers blooming. And I personally cataloged, and the list is even more extensive for the Petroglyph National Monument, of at least 50 or 60 wildflower species that are blooming in this seemingly barren area. They weren't blanketing the area like the poppies do in the Florida mountains or pictures do of super blooms, but there was always dozens and dozens of wildflowers blooming. And then there are probably 25 or 30 shrubs and bushes, the snakeweed here and the broom dahlia over here, 2 trees, juniper tree and the desert willow trees, and lots of grasses. So there were probably well over 100 species of native plants in this area. And the whole community of insects and reptiles and lizards and birds that thrived in this area. So here's a water tank, and there's a subdivision right here that decimated that one little area. And of course, 20 years ago, the subdivision I lived in decimated the area. So now another subdivision has moved in and completely changed the plant communities. So this is, here's the water tower up here, and this is the same area I just showed you. The developer is real proud of this park that they put in, but to me, it looks more like a parking lot than a park. Of the dozens of wildflower species and such, the wildflowers are gone. The shrubs and bushes are gone. The pollinators are gone. The insects are gone. The mammals are gone. So everything's gone except a new community of asphalt streets and gravel yards and people with their cars. So when I say that we can do some good by planting native plants in our backyard and establishing a sustainable habitat, there's a lot of scientific basis for that. Wildlife live in what ecologists call a patchy environment. The food resources and the resources they need to survive are not just widespread, they're in little patches here and there. So you may have a seep spring here, or temporary or permanent spring that provides some food and some flowers, or maybe a rainfall against a slope. A thunderstorm provides a seasonal source of food. Animals, particularly birds and mammals, can travel long distances. In White Sands, a study on moths, sphinx moths or hawk moths that pollinate evening primrose, tracked one moth over a 10 square mile period in a night, pollinating evening primroses. Smaller insects like the tiny, smallest bees that we have, they may only travel 100 feet or 100 yards. So it's theoretically possible, and I think it has happened, is that bees, that particularly ground nesting bees and some bees, can live out their whole life cycle in your backyard so that you can have a sustaining habitat for not just visiting, but for permanent residence. So it's true that if you plant it, they will come. And a habitat needs water, food, shelter, nesting sites, and host plants. And let's just look at a few of those. A water feature, of course, for a backyard oasis is one of the most important things. And it can be a standalone feature. It doesn't have to have a whole complete habitat around it. You can have any of these in limited numbers according to what your capabilities are and your space is. Here's a water feature in a corralis home and a garden. It's kind of elaborate and probably a little more elaborate than most of us could handle. I have for a long time had a little solar fountain from the internet. It has a little solar pump down here, and there's a panel that you can stretch out and find, like 6-inch square panel, find a sunny spot for. Pumps the water from the basin down here up this hose into the jug, and then it flows down. Birds like flowing water. The sound really attracts them. The bottom basin is just big enough for robins and threshers and that size bird, and the little smaller bowls are perfect for finches and sparrows. So that worked real good. And then I broke the top bowl, so so now they're all planter boxes. But a bird bath is something that I think every yard could benefit from. Certainly, social birds like sparrows and finches and robins and other birds that they just love to get in the bath, half a dozen at a time, and splash water and really have a grand old time, it looks like. Really, you can be simple and just have a dish on a drip. Bees like still water, so a dish with a few rocks in it and on a drip or in a micro spray from a drip system, that's it's equally good and necessary. When you see the little baby bird up here, that it also likes easy accessible water. This is in my backyard, and almost every year I have birds nesting. Butterflies like moist soil. So the splash from the bird bath, the micro sprays from the drip system, overflows from drip irrigation or drip bowl. That's all a butterfly needs. They'll land on the more moist soil and absorb the water with their tongues. And I don't know if you've seen them puddling, is the term, when they all get together on a moist spot and drink together. Now, food, of course, is the thing that we have control over most with our plants. The plant diversity is the key to, if you want, insect and pollinator diversity. Plants come in all sizes and shapes because pollinators come in all sizes and shapes. Or maybe it's the other way around. Pollinators comes in all sizes and shapes because plants are. Anyway, we'll talk about the different shapes and pollination techniques in a minute. But, and also 3-season flowering from, the first bud breaks in the spring until the first frost. You can have flowering plants in your yard. You can enjoy the benefits of a beautiful garden all year long, all growing throughout the whole growing season, and the birds and the butterflies that they will attract. Perhaps overlooked a lot is shelter, the necessity for shelter. All animals need shelter during the day, away from the elements, to protect them from predators, and to nest in if you're a bird. So these top three, and this one are all butterfly, all in my backyard. This is in the bee hotel, which are real popular, easy to make and easy to buy, easy to order off the internet. This is at the open space. It's a pretty elaborate, but you can get smaller ones that provide for bees that burrow into bark or into trees or into old timber or wood piles. You can provide that for them. And of course, birds need good shelter to provide a shady nest and that's protected from the elements and from the predators. So when you're thinking of plants for your garden, you want to think of diversity of height and diversity of foliage density, and have bare ground for burrowing bees, and exposure from sunny to shady. Of course, the engine that drives a pollinator garden and pollinators is the nectar and the pollen that plants supply. The nectar is for energy, and the pollen is protein. And not all nectar is equal, and not all pollen is equal. So that's one thing that helps with the diversity. There have been lots of studies on the components of nectar, and there's a lot of micronutrients in nectar that is probably one of the reasons that some plants attract one kind of pollinator and other plants other kinds. I know I've read that members of the coffee family, these plants have caffeine in their nectar, so they give a little extra buzz to get the bees going in the morning. And Sacred Datura is hallucinogenic pollen and nectar to keep the bees maybe buzzing around a little extra longer in their flower to ensure pollination. So you can look at a plant and almost tell what pollinates it, what class of animals, or maybe even what specific animals pollinate the plants. So in your garden, you want to have a diversity of plants that will provide something for everyone all the time. So the different strategies are generalist pollinators, which provide, it's like a buffet bar that's always open. There's always pollen, there's always nectar. Everybody's welcome to drop in and feast. Then there's specialist pollinators, and this is like RSVP, dining by invitation only. Bees have to have a long tongue. They have to have hair on their bodies to collect the pollen. Hummingbirds have to have a long bill. So the flower can save a lot of energy and not giving away its pollen and nectar to insects that are not going to pollinate it. It's always good to have a number of generalist plants in your garden so that you will attract a lot of different pollinators. So, coneflowers, asters, senecios or groundsels, globe mallows. These are all beautiful flowers that bloom throughout, have different bloom periods through the year that you can have in your yard for both beauty and for long season nectar supplies. The composites, the daisy family, Asteraceae is one family that almost all the flowers, not all of them, but many of the flowers, particularly the ones we can get in our gardens, are generalist. It's a very small fee charged to the plants, to the animals, for the nectar and the pollen. This goldenrod, which is a real important late season source of pollen and nectar, it's got a police car moth on it. It's got a bee flying in. It's got a fly on it. If you sit there very long, you're going to see numerous kinds of pollinators and large numbers of them on this one branch tip here. So things to look for your garden, are the aster family, blanket flowers and cone flowers and purple asters, the parsley family, not yarrow, that's an aster family, but the different flowers, arnica and different other flowers in the parsley family, globe mallows. There's beautiful globe mallows that volunteer in my yard every year, and you can get them from ground covers to waist high stems. I put milkweed in here, even though milkweed is a highly specialized plant for pollinators, but it's very generous with its pollen. It's very stingy with its, very stingy with its pollen, but very generous with nectar. So almost every insect that has a tongue can feast on the nectar that that the milkweeds have. And then we have the specialists, plants that cater to a specific kind of pollinator, like Penstemons. This is the Penstemon that we see in the sandias a lot for hummingbirds, and Datura for the hawk moths. You can see they've got a long moth that goes, a long tongue on there that goes down to the base of the plant to get the nectar. And when they dip down in, this is the stamen. These are the stamens that have the pollen, and this is the stigma that receives the pollen. So the moth goes in, dips down in, and gets pollen all over its head, and then transfers that as it comes out or as it goes into another flower. Now you see bees all over these, and they're just going to the pollen or crawling down in here to get to the nectar and not pollinated. So to be pollinated, it has to have sphinx moths, hawk moths. Some other specialized plants, the penstemons tend to be specialist for a number of different pollinators. The bean family, legumes, clover is wonderful. It collects, it attracts a lot. And the lead plant's a bushy plant that also has pretty flowers, stalks on it that attracts hummingbirds, butterflies and bees. And so with the mint and the sage family, they all will attract certain classes of insects, and they're beautiful. These plants provide incredible beauty to our garden. So the hummingbirds, of course, they like red plants, red flowers. It's when you look at a plant, you see it's red. It doesn't have any odor to it. It has a tubular flower that's about the length of a hummingbird bill. That's a hummingbird plant. So bees pollinate plants. They look for blue or yellow flowers. That's the colors they see. Other colors just look gray to them. Usually they're tubular flowers because bees have long tongues. It has a landing pad in the front, has nectar guidelines to direct them back to the nectaries where the nectar is, and lots of other combinations of features that ensure pollination by a bee. Bees are the most important pollinators in nature. The second is fly pollination. But nobody plants a fly garden. They plant bee gardens and butterfly gardens, but not fly gardens. Why not? We need to get a little more recognition for flies. So here they are generalists, but also they're plants that really specifically target flies. Flies are active at higher elevations and cooler weather much longer during the day than bees are, so they're more efficient for pollinating in those mountain higher up at elevations and on cooler days. They like shallow flowers because they don't have real long tongues. A musty odor often attracts them, and they don't need nectar guides because they usually do shallow flowers that don't have tubular entrances, tubular throats. And butterflies, bless their hearts, they get all the love, but they don't do all the work. You can see this butterfly sitting on a cone flower, and here's the flowers down here with little tubular flowers that the butterfly inserts his tongue into. Might get a little pollen from that on his tongue. It looks like a few spots there, but the legs are long. They don't get pollen on the legs. The legs don't have any special hairs adapted to carrying pollen. So it's not servicing the flower here particularly at all. Whereas the thistle gets a little more aggressive here. It has stamen on long, pollen on the long stamens that actually touch the butterfly when it dips down into to get the nectar. And you can see the pollen all over the head there. So thistles may actually benefit from butterfly pollination. It's kind of hard to get thistles though at the nursery for your yard. It's not a popular nursery plant, even though it's a wildly popular pollinator plant. And beetles, they're the generalist pollinators. They're still use their same technique as 150 million years ago of crawling around on the plant and eating the petals, eating the stamens, eating the ovaries. There are some plants that are specifically designed for beetle pollination, and they usually have the seeds way down deep inside the ovary so that the beetles can't get to it to eat them. You'll see hordes of beetles on goldenrods, and cactus flowers, from tiny ones to large ones, but you can see how efficient they are with all the pollen on them. Moth pollination. Moth is very important pollinators also. This is a datura planted from a seed on the side of my driveway. And so I cleared out some of the gravel, pulled up the ground cloth, it has no supplemental water, and I planted a datura seed. Well, the datura seed came up, and then now this is half the size it would be. It's in the morning when I go out to get the newspaper, it's covered with bees. The flowers soon fade. They open at night in the dusk and bloom for one night. But in the meantime, Gaillardias started volunteering in my yard from one I planted. Chocolate flowers volunteer all over my yard and wherever they can. There's from one that I planted 15 years ago. It's still there. Here's the globe mallow that they just pop up everywhere. And there's a colomia, a clammy weed over here. So all this kind of just has grown up around the datura, and they produce copious amounts of seeds every year. And but when I chop it out, and when it starts to die out, I always remember to wear long sleeve shirt and gloves, because the hallucinogenic properties can soak through to the skin. Let's talk quickly about planting through the seasons. You know, the paradigm for the garden show yards is to have something blooming year round for the beauty and the relaxation and the benefit of the humans. But we can do that also for the benefit of pollinators. So the first thing you need is some perennial shrubs. This is a patchy plume planted beside my driveway. It's woody. The perennial shrubs are woody, so they don't have to germinate, develop a root system, then develop a whole stem and branches. They're all ready to go. Actually, they have the leaf buds and the flower buds already formed in the winter. So all they have to do when the soil warms up a little and the air temperature warms up a little is to pop open their flowers. And the bees that have hibernated or birthed in the burrows in the ground or in the trees, they're pretty much synchronized their emergence, with the climatic factors, the temperature factors, with the emergence of early blooming perennial flowers. Patchy plume is in the rose family, and it has lots of pollen here. So that's early blooming shrubs are really something to consider. And a lot of the early blooming shrubs will provide 3 seasons of benefits for the pollinator. The New Mexico olive, it flowers emerge on it before the leaves do, and the bees go crazy over this. It's the holly family, or this family, has separate male plants and female plants. So they all produce pollen. I mean, they all produce nectar, but only the males produce pollen and take it to the female plant. And then the female produces seeds, fruit for during the summer. And then all summer and spring, it has good shelter. I really like choke cherries, and I used to have one in a lot next to where I lived, but they're produce early pollen and nectar. The flowers come about the same time the leaves do, and then in the summer you'll get berries that birds love them. So do bears, for that matter. But and it's a beautiful, can be trimmed into a small tree or beautiful shrub. Another 3-season plant is the red barberry. You can see how much good shelter it gives with these real tough, spiny evergreen leaves, and an abundant source of berries for birds in the summer. So spring and summer is a time of maximum bloom. Spring flowers triggered by spring rains, and there's other flowers that are triggered by the monsoon rains. So it's a good time for abundant source of pollen and nectar. Columbines, you can get yellow ones that are pollinated by hawk moths, blue ones that are pollinated by bumblebees, and red ones by hummingbirds. So these are all native to our area. This is a little further north in the mountains. This is in the Sandias, and these they're native to the mountains, but they thrive in garden settings. And milkweeds are one of the most interesting plants, I think. They are really a keystone plant for a pollinator garden. They supply a rich source of nectar, and butterflies, bees, everybody enjoys the nectar, and the nectar is down inside these little hoods, and you can see the skipper here that is drinking from that. And when you get out so many insects here, you'll start getting a little ecosystem in itself here. You'll have predators like the assassin bugs and spiders that will come and feed on the insects, smaller insects. And as I mentioned, the pollen for milkweeds is in little packets, and it has to be a large bumblebee or large wasp, tarantula wasp, that actually its legs have hairs that snag the pollen packages that are hidden down in the central columns, and we'll take it to another one and insert it back into the column. It's an amazing process. So if you can get milkweed, get it growing in your garden, for sure, try to do that. The antelope horns and the broadleaf are real drought tolerant desert milkweeds. The horsetail milkweed grows all up and down the road going from Cedar Park to Cedar Crest up to the crest, and mid-elevation milkweeds that require just a little bit of moisture do well in the garden. The butterfly milkweed, the showy milkweed. And these are all host plants for monarchs and queens and some other butterflies. I really like Penstemons. I have like 5 species in my yard. They really target specific plants, like bumblebees go to the James Penstemon. Other ones have smaller size tubes for flies and small bees. And then the red ones, of course, are for hummingbirds. So the more Penstemons I can get in my yard, I never pass one up when I go to the nursery and find a place for it. And I have a cardinal Penstemon that's volunteering now. For years and years it didn't, and now it's set up some volunteers. And I have a desert Penstemon that just is prolific. It's an evergreen, and it blooms. It's red and blooms just early April when the hummingbirds are migrating through. And I pull them up by the dozens. They grow all over my yard on all sides of my house. So it's very easy to grow the desert Penstemon pseudospecticalis. This is a woody ground cover that hummingbirds like, the pine leaf Penstemon. It requires full sun and a little extra water in the desert. If all the pollinators got together and voted on their favorite must-have plants, I'm sure the common sunflower being in the top 3 probably. It is such a cornucopia of nectar and pollen and seeds for the birds. This is a little planter box that probably has, I don't know, 5 or 8 sunflower stems growing in it. Each one has, 5 or 10 branches on it, and the branches all have flowers on it. So and then in the flowers themselves, they're composites. So you can see all the pollen on each one of these little tubular disc florets. So each one of these flowers will have maybe 15 or 20 disc florets that provide the pollen and the nectar. So this one little stand here maybe has 1,000 flowers in it, that are going to keep the pollinators busy from midsummer all the way until into September. And then the seeds form, and the goldfinches and other seed-eating birds will feed on them. So don't deadhead sunflowers. Actually, the goldfinches, they start eating the leaves as soon as the flower gets 6 inches tall. These volunteer all over my yard. I have to pull out a lot of them. I just leave them some in the back corner against the wall, where they can be great, kind of gangly looking and not interfere with some of the other gardens. Late summer food plants. Be sure to include some like the goldenrod and the sunflowers that bloom all the way into the first frost. This is a biome. 3 years ago, Doris gave me a little sunflower seed, a root, and I put it in a pot, and the first year it sent up 2 little shoots. So I planted it. Then last year it sent up 8 or 10, and this year or this season, this spring it sent up, 15 stems. So it spreads by rhizomes, and from from August through September, it's just covered with bees. So the late pollen and is really important for bee nesting to overwinter their nests. Beautiful combinations of colors in nature that really would love to duplicate some of them in my yard. Just wanted to go real quickly over some of the 2 or 3 host plants that are important for pollinators' gardens, and what the life cycle is for butterflies. This is in my backyard, an ash tree, and I would sit out there and eat lunch and watch the birds at the feeders and the bees, and the swallowtails would come flying over, and they never stopped. They just go zip right through the yard, and I never could figure out what they were doing. And finally, I got my binoculars and started watching them. They were laying eggs on the ash tree. They would fly in, in 10 seconds, lay an egg and be gone. So ash trees, hop trees, and choke cherries are all host plants for the two-tailed swallowtail. So they lay their egg, the first instar, they molt 5 times, and the first instar is what the molts are called. A lot of butterflies, larvae will mimic bird droppings for obvious reasons, since they're delectable little tidbits of food for a bird. And then as they get bigger, they take on more distinct forms, sometimes hairy, and to try to deter the birds. I seldom find any, unless I take a moth or take a chrysalis and put it in a jar and keep it. They usually don't make it very long when the birds start foraging for them. But that's one of the purposes of a pollinator garden. Mountain mahogany is another good host plant for the mountain mahogany hairstreak and the Columbia silk moth. So those are nice landscape plants. Juniper hairstreak, juniper plants. Look at the juniper trees next time you're out during the summer. See if you can find these little caterpillars on it. You can see how camouflaged they are, and that's one reason why we need native plants. That many butterflies and moths, their caterpillars are camouflaged to survive on that. Then in the winter, juniper trees have berries on them, the female plants do, that are a real important food source for robins and other overwintering birds. So if you have caterpillars in your yard, you have a healthy habitat. This is a volunteer purple aster that, they come up quite frequently, and I found this caterpillar on it. And this is one of the volunteer gaillardias, or blanket flowers. The caterpillar is going after the developing ovaries down here, I think, in the flower head. Well, it turns out that seeds and nectar is not quite enough for birds to rear their youngs on. They need protein. They need animal protein. A lot of them do. And they get it from caterpillars. And a lot of the songbirds, like chickadees and goldfinches, one of their main sources is the caterpillars that nest in trees. And there's some oak trees botanists have counted, 30 or 40 species of moths that lay their caterpillars in the trees. And just by coincidence, not by coincidence, the hatching of the birds coincides with the hatching of the caterpillars. So everything's connected and coordinated. Well, this is my modest yard in the winter, and ash trees back in this corner. I've got a thistle feeder hanging here, another seed feeder over here. There's my bird bath. And it's important to winterize your pollinator habitat because under all this snow, there's a colony of bees back here that emerge every spring. There's leaf litter all around the base of the wall here that you can't see with the snow, but it's got a lot of the ground foraging birds really work that a lot. And I read where like 40% of caterpillars of the moths lay their eggs in leaf litter. So that's what they're looking for. So if you want to maintain your winter habitat, you can have color and activity in your garden all year round because we have a lot of winter birds that the towhees, the juncos, and the doves, and the house finches, and goldfinches will utilize a yard if the habitat is maintained by providing seeds and water. Here's the leaf litter with a green-tailed towhee scratching in it. Suet, I make my own suet, and the bird bath, the robins will flock to that. So with a little bit of planning and effort, we all can become backyard botanists, landscape ecologists, and get our yards if we want to, get our yards certified. Like I said, it takes like 50% native plants, not using any pesticides or herbicides. But if you have a balcony and room for one plant, plant something that'll help provide food and sustenance for the pollinators. And when we do this, what our goal, at least my goal here, is to restore the habitat, restore lost habitat, one driveway at a time, if that's the best we can do. So that's the end of the program. I don't know if you've seen my books or not. The Landscaping with Native Plants of the Southwest has been out for like 10 years now. And this year I have a new book on native plant gardening for bird, bees, and butterflies that kind of updates the status of plants, including a lot of the habitat information.
It's 8 o'clock.
And this is a typical page. This is a double page spread in the book with this one's on flax. And so it gives what animals, what insect pollinators or birds that you can attract when you plant that. So thank you so much. And I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any, or we can go to the chat and work from there.
George, thank you so much. That was really inspiring. And someone just asked, where that lovely garden center, where was that you just showed?
The home or the home garden?
No, it looked like a garden center with a lot of plants. It's just a few slides back.
Let me see. I'm not sure if I don't know which one you're talking about.
Well, at least there were a lot of pots on tables.
Oh, that was Plants of the Southwest.
Okay.
And yeah, so that was the native plant nurseries, and the native plant nurseries are getting more and more attuned. I mean, the commercial nurseries are more and more attuned to planting using having native plants available. I know Asuna has a section for native plants, and Jericho has some, and I'm not sure about Santa Ana Garden Center yet, whether they're going to be open or not this spring. But you can find native plants a lot easier now than you could in the past.
So let's just run through some of these questions. Another one that was just recently asked was about how to make your own suet. Okay,
this is something I've been doing for a number of years. The birds love it. There's a lot of suets you can buy. Some of them are good. Some of them have, I think, a lot of petroleum wax or something in them to hold them to keep them from melting or whatever. The suet I use is takes a pound of lard and a pound of peanut butter, and you melt it all together. You melt the lard, put it in the peanut butter, and melt the peanut butter in with it. Then put in a cup of oats and a cup of cornmeal and any nuts or raisins or anything else like that you'd want, and a third of a cup of sugar. And then you pour that into flat pans. If you, like me, you have a lot of restaurant take-homes, plastic take-home containers. Some of those are just perfect for pouring it in, and till it's like an inch deep. If the temperature gets up to 65, it liquefies, so you can't use it. I mean, the birds can't do it, so it has to be below 60 degrees for the suet to work. And the birds in my yard will go through a pound of one recipe in about 3 or 4 days. So they, there'll be 10 or 15 birds at a time on the suet dish. And I've actually kind of put it up at times right by my window, and so they can see the birds really up close, but they are kind of sloppy, and the suet ends up getting all over the window glass, so I keep it a little farther away in the yard. Okay.
Any follow-up questions on that one?
Mhm.
Just go ahead and unmute if you have one. So then we'll go ahead and I hope we'll keep adding questions, but we have one about how valuable are native cottonwoods in the Rio Grande Valley for pollinators or other insects.
Well, they're not particularly, they're wind pollinated. And so in terms of just for pollinators providing nectar, they don't. But there are keystone plants for the ecosystem. They provide shelter, they provide a whole ecosystem of plants that grow in a cottonwood grove in a bosque that's dependent on cottonwoods for the habitat, maintaining the habitat. So
leaf litter.
Beg your pardon?
They provide leaf litter.
Yeah, leaf litter, and if you get the females, you get a lot of cotton. So I think some of the cultivars for cottonwoods don't produce seeds, or don't produce the cotton. So and that's a whole different, a whole nother story is cultivars. And I know that just this last year, I bought several native species like Gaillardias and Coreopsis that had been manipulated so much by the propagators that they didn't produce any pollen or nectar. And so they sat there with beautiful flowers all summer, and I never saw a bee on them. I never saw a pollinator on them. So it helps really to get a native plant that is not manipulated a lot, and you can actually, the ones I have that have been successful, they volunteer all over my yard. So it's be careful when you buy these real beautiful looking plants from a nursery that in reality is a sterile plant.
Very interesting. Okay. And what about, someone's asking, do we get a lot of monarchs or queen butterflies in Albuquerque?
That's a good question that people are trying to answer by monitoring, by keeping track of sightings. I don't see a whole lot. I see them, a few every year pass through my yard. We're not on like a major, New Mexico isn't on a major migratory pathway, but animals do follow the Rio Grande River north and south. So, they are an important part of the fauna, the butterfly fauna.
And then a question I had about hummingbirds feeding on globe willows. And can't see any blossoms. I don't know if that's something else, sugar ants or.
Well, globe mallows, is that what you mean?
No, globe willows.
Willow, okay. They willows are wind pollinated, but so hummingbirds wouldn't be getting nectar, but hummingbirds forage for little insects all the time. And they, scour. I've seen them scouring the junipers and scouring, other plants looking for, get that extra protein. So, they do need protein, and I would think that's what they're getting from willow trees or any other bushes that they're working over.
I think we've got some more questions here. Have you made any observations about the changing of bloom times and pollinator presence related to climate change?
nothing scientifically, I know, this year at my house, I didn't get the first freeze until late November. I was picking ripe tomatoes off my plants all the way through November. During the summertime, we had a very hot, dry period of 3 or 4 weeks. And I know tomatoes don't set if it gets over like 92 degrees. And so that period, there are no flowers produced seed, were fertilized. And so, because they didn't produce pollen. So then come September or so, there was a period of, a couple of weeks when I had very few tomatoes. So the temperatures on a lot of plants have a direct effect on whether they set seeds or not. But I couldn't make a list on, this particular plant is flowering later or earlier or whatever. That's, I think, a little too, the weather is too variable on a short-term period to make those kind of conclusions.
And George, someone's asking, does your native plant gardening, which is showing here on the screen, focus on plants in our area?
Yeah, it does. That's the book has it has a lot of parameters that they need, the zones that they, temperature zones, water zones, and it tells, like some plants only grow in Arizona, like saguaros. Some plants only grow in the deserts. Some plants need foothills or the mountains. And so I give the growing conditions, full and where the plant grows best. So it's not all the plants in here grow on the west side, on the West Mesa, or in the bosque, but these are native plants that grow in New Mexico and Arizona in my book.
And we have a couple of questions regarding neighbors and working gently and effectively with neighbors who strongly dislike leaf litter, or neighbors who spray insecticide, who don't tolerate ants and want to pull weeds.
I have
changing attitudes.
Yeah, I've actually given my landscaping book to some of my neighbors. I have one neighbor that just this year took out his turf grass, and he kept it looking like an English garden with everything trimmed. He would go out and vacuum up the leaf litter out of the gravel around in the yard. That was his Sunday activity for 2 hours with a leaf vacuum. He had it, sprayed, and he had a beautiful yucca, Faxon yucca that's 15 feet tall, and it bloomed one year. And in 15 years, it only bloomed once, and actually I don't know how it was pollinated, since yuccas are supposed to have very have specific moths that pollinate them. Well, this pollinated it. It got pollinated. It produced fruit. And the pollinator, the moth larva, started crawling down the trunk to dig into the ground to pupate. That's what more of a yucca moth's larvae do. And so my neighbor saw that and said, "Oh my God, my yucca's got worms." And he called the tree guy out, and he looked at it and says, "Your yucca has worms." And he said, "You better cut it down and get it out of it." So he cut it off. Took out his beautiful 15-foot Faxon yucca because he thought it had worms. So we've got a long way to go for educating people on native plants and on on establishing habitat and what's acceptable, between, I mean, there's all layers from just total wildscaping, which I kind of tend toward, to a beautiful design garden like Judith Phillips does with native plants that provide all the habitat needs. So then that whole spectrum there, somehow we've, got to convince people that you don't need to have a garden that's sterile, beautiful but sterile.
Well, and I think your little talk about all the species that are influenced might make a difference to some people. I don't know, birds and just attracting all kinds of species.
We've a lot of the garden club groups, even ones, like the Rose Society, whatever, that aren't specifically for natives, are getting more and more educated about the importance of natives. And I've given programs to community centers and to libraries and to homeowners association, neighborhood associations, so it's whatever we can do through the media, through books, through personal interactions with our friends, through our Native Plant Society and our efforts. Pollinator Garden at Osa Grande Park in Albuquerque. So, it's been a long, slow, weird trip, but people are finally, nurseries are starting to carry more plants, more native plants, and people are starting